He's editor-in-chief of Breitbart News and a New York Times best-selling author. And on this podcast, he brings deep research, prescient analysis, and world-class guests. He's Alex Marlow, and this is the Alex Marlow Show.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you wanted it and you got it. An hour of Mike Benz, one of my favorite Americans, and I would say one of the most productive people in alternative media and just an all-around fantastic guy and a font of information. You know him from @Mike Benz Cyber all across the social web. Also his organization, Foundation for Freedom Online, foundationforfreedomonline.com if you want to throw him some support, and you should. And his interviews and episodes with me have been some of my favorites and some of the most popular shows that we do. We just sat down for an hour, and it's fantastic. We get into all the Epstein stuff, and of course, he pulls out a lot of the buried leads and explains some of the more complicated things so all of you can understand it. But before we get into that, a couple of unbelievable sponsors for the show. Preborn, this is one where you want to hear about this organization. Preborn saves lives. They save lives via ultrasounds. Because when a woman is contemplating whether or not she's going to have a baby, if she sees the baby on the ultrasound, she's statistically twice as likely to have the child. And we want that. And I'll tell you, having been down this road, having had 4 confirmation of life visits with my wife's doctor, when you hear that baby's heartbeat, it is an absolute burst of energy and magic, and you can never imagine terminating that life. Once that happens to you, once you hear the heartbeat, once you see the child in the womb in the ultrasound, it's a profound experience, and I want this for all mothers, particularly those who might be contemplating whether or not they're going to terminate that pregnancy. And with Thanksgiving on the horizon, first of all, great time to donate. Second of all, you're giving a potential new mom the chance to have her Thanksgiving haunted for the rest of her life by making the worst decision ever. Or perhaps next Thanksgiving, she's celebrating her baby's first Thanksgiving, all thanks to you. So preborn.com/Marlow, preborn.com/Marlow. You go to 833-850-BABY, 833-850-2229, 833-850-BABY. $140, 5 ultrasounds, $280. You could save up to 10 babies with 10 ultrasounds. A $15,000 gift provides an entire ultrasound machine, and you're saving babies for a long time. One of you has already donated a full machine in my name, which is just unbelievable. I'm so happy about that, and thank you. Make sure to click my name in the drop-down because I want to make sure that Preborn knows that we care in the Marlow audience. But this is a terrific group. Preborn.com/Marlow. Also, my colleagues at Salem, something very cool cooking, which is Call Sign Courage, the story of Space Force Commander Matt Lohmeyer. He's the one who blew the lid off the military's DEI agenda. He saw how Marxist messaging, critical race theory, and rampant DEI training was changing the culture of the military. Suddenly, everyone was equal. They stripped away a merit-based selection and promotions, and the lack of accountability, competency, and effectiveness has become a domestic threat. Absolutely right. The focus on wasn't winning wars with warriors. It was on bogus DEI nonsense. He spoke up, talked about how it was tearing apart the military's unity, our readiness, and the whole reason why we have a military in the first place, lethality, the ability to fight, the ability to win. And what happened? They broke into his home, they spied on him, they threatened him, but Lohmeyer didn't back down. So career officers kicked him out. Then President Trump made him Undersecretary of the Air Force so he could solve the problem. And when the stakes were high, this was the guy that stood up. And you don't want to miss this movie, Call Sign Courage. The Matt Lohmeyer story, Call Sign Courage. You can watch it or buy the DVD at salemnow.com. Salemnow.com. The best people in broadcasting, we know that. Go to salemnow.com, check out Call Sign Courage. Let's get into it with Mike Benz. Shout out to Misty and John Cassio. Here's the interview. All right, special episode today, hotly anticipated, the one that the audience demanded. Mike Benz, more Mike Benz. Everyone wants more Mike Benz, national treasure. Mike, you taking any extra safety precautions after our friend Charlie was assassinated?
Well, I think everybody's on edge about it, but the fact is, I think the global community rallied for Charlie in a huge way, and I'm just doing what I've been doing, and if whatever happens, frankly, I'm on a mission.
I admire that, but let's be smart. I was just thinking, I'll talk to the audience about this a little bit more, but I just watched a documentary on Bobby Kennedy. It's kind of on Bobby Kennedy Jr. that Sean Stone, Oliver Stone's son, put together, and really interesting. But it just reminds you that these things can come in bunches. So we all got to continue to be vigilant, especially given the media's reaction and how they allowed for people to make fun of it shamelessly, make fun of Charlie's murder. I still can't believe it that the news cycle just came and went over Halloween. Everyone's dressing up as Charlie with the bloody neck. I mean, it's kind of a sickness.
Yeah, it actually, I was thinking about this actually just last night. I was thinking about how much momentum, 2025 is almost over, and it's been such a magical ride in so many ways. If you trace back, starting in January with our buddy comedy movie of Trump and Elon Musk in the White House, and just last night they were together again, and Trump just gave a little physical sort of, pat on the belly almost, and Elon nodded, and I was like, damn, just like old times. And then I thought to myself, wait, old times? That was like
this
January.
Year.
That was this year.
This year.
That wasn't 20 years ago.
Yeah.
That was this year. My God, what a whirlwind it's been. And then I thought, what a long, strange trip it's been, and how much we've been through, and how it was all for the good, in the sense that everything that Trump almost getting shot and almost getting having to spend being Rikers Island. It felt like everything that happened had to have happened to be where we are, except the Charlie thing.
Yeah.
The Charlie thing is the one thing that's like, no, that didn't have to happen.
Yeah, it did not have to happen. Since we're on this briefly, you're someone who has a huge megaphone on X, the Everything app. What's your take on the algorithm these days? Because I feel like my feed is very anti-Trump, and I feel like that part of this is just organic. People who are extremely online on the right are just fighting amongst themselves a lot, which we can touch on in greater detail or not. But it just does feel like that there are various forms of anti-Trumpism that are dominating the algorithm now. And I'm just wondering if that's a conscious shift. I'm not saying it's Musk himself who's doing it, but it just really does feel like whenever I'm on that app, I keep hearing about all the stuff Trump is doing wrong.
Yeah, I think that's broadly reflective of some of the schisms organically playing out in the Trump base. And just because things are criticizing Trump or sort of frustrated with Trump, to me, doesn't make it like anti-Trump. Like, I think part of the issue is when you have a Republican blowout electoral college and popular vote victory, plus a Republican House, plus a Republican Senate, plus a Republican majority Supreme Court,
Right.
The expectations are very high that the pace of wins will be fast and dramatic, especially after everything they did to us. Everything they did to us over 4 years, arresting everyone, breaking every rule in the Constitution, going after, domestic weaponization, everything. And I think that there was a lot of momentum at first, and there are wins that are still happening, but at a slower pace.
Right.
And with more strings attached, and some of the basic easy win, like Arctic Frost is a great example of this, right? I mean,
which is on my agenda. Yeah, go for it.
This just fell out of the sky. A whistleblower goes to Chuck Grassley and says, oh, hey, guess what? 430 high-level GOP figures were targeted, were secretly subpoenaed, including 20% of Senate Republicans. This appears to be illegal in terms of a violation of the Senate Judiciary and House Judiciary Committee's abilities to oversee the FBI. The FBI can't secretly get the communications of the very committee that's supposed to be overseeing them. It was all to take down Trump. It was Jack Smith and Judge Boasberg, and I put up on Twitter I think it got like 3 million views or something within a couple days, of 3 different criminal statutes that Judge Boasberg and Jack Smith could be hit with for violating this, for spying on Congress. And there's been this slow-moving impeachment of Judge Boasberg, which everyone knows is politically doomed because you need 60 votes.
Yeah.
and you're not going to peel off.
That's why I wrote a whole
Democrats.
book, my book, Breaking the Law, and I don't call for the impeachments. And then, I hear Bannon talk about them and I get all jacked up, like we should do the impeachments, but it feels, and he can, by all means, Steve, keep going. But I don't know if they're going to work overall. Like it just, I wasn't raising everyone's hopes.
I still think it's good to do.
Yeah, it could be great to do. But I don't want to get people's hopes too high that's the solution.
Right. The process is still a stain on the reputation of the judge and creates a record that this is not cool. I mean, imagine if Judge Eileen Cannon, in the Trump case, had done something like that to spy on Senate Democrats. And also part of it is they're going after the bar associations, which is another wing of
productive.
This.
Yes,
but what I'm getting at here is when you see someone like Ted Cruz get up there and say this is illegal, they spied on me, I'm a senator, I ran for president. If they can do this to me, they can do this to anyone. You talk this big talk. Okay, if it's illegal, hey, guess what? We've got Justice Department for that. There should be accountability. And what ends up happening instead is they slip this provision into the Senate, to pay themselves like $800,000 or $500,000. So it's like let's take this on directly.
Reform. What is they asking for with this payment, and what do you think should be done?
Well, I think this is an attempt to get restitution for people who had to go through the Arctic frost dragnet, but it appears to be this kind of fund for senators. I'm not even sure that members of the House of Representatives have access to it. I know that Mike Johnson is trying to get this stripped, and a bunch of members of the House of Representatives, Republican ones, were upset about this. But to me, what it really signifies is, okay, this weaponization machine hit everyone. But instead of taking out the weaponization machine and pursuing criminal penalties for those who broke the law, you're paying yourself so that you're made whole and everybody else is still stuck in the same system. I mean, the head of the Conservative Partnership Institute was targeted by this. OAN was targeted by this. Where's their restitution? And I think this is kind of emblematic of what a lot of people are feeling, which is that there's not the pace of reforms is slowing down quite significantly versus the first few months of the admin. And now, I think that people's expectations were kind of unrealistically high when they saw how fast things were moving between January and April while Elon was there. But the fact is, while Elon was there, we moved fast and broke stuff. And
I think this is a specific thing I've been kicking around in my mind. I don't know if I've got a clear, because there's a charitable view, which is that we were on a dead sprint for the first 100 days or whatever, and you can't sprint forever. Just, scientific fact. But, I don't like that Doge is not a factor in the conversation. And I don't know if it even exists at all. And if it does, like, what is it doing? I don't know. And that's not a good development. So what happened with Doge, and why can't we sustain the pace? And is there any hope of getting back to a fast pace?
So I think when his special government employee time ran out, the power that Doge, and again, I'm just peering through the tea leaves, total speculation when I say this, but I think that when you walked, because what I know is that from my contacts in the admin, which are pretty significant, I was told by multiple people at multiple different agencies that Doge was a complete game changer, because whereas agencies were previously ruled by careers, and if you just look at the numbers, the careers, I was talking about this, for example, with the FBI. We have 4 political appointees at the FBI. Yeah. There's 38,000 FBI employees. So it's 4 versus 38,000. The great equalizer in the first couple months of the admin was that Doge was they were in the building and they directly had the deputized power of the Office of Management and Budget, effectively, to just cut the budgets of anybody in the career class, shut down any department, freeze the funding, if you were a career and you were trying to be insubordinate against the politicals, the Doge could come in and make the careers have to respect the politicals, because if they didn't do what they were told in the chain of command, you'd get doged. And that was a game changer. My contacts at state and DHS and in the early USAID were all telling me that, oh my God, the agency is, for the first time, seems to be working how it's supposed to be working, because the careers are doing what the political appointees told them to do, because they all fear, not because they fear the political appointees who are only allowed to do their job, not go upstream and hit the budget at the White House level. They fear Doge. And so Doge was kind of but I think that was what was imbued in Doge was the kind of silent power of Elon, and the fact that Trump, I think, before the cabinet was fully filled out, was kind of deferred to Elon on most things that Trump didn't care too much about in terms of bureaucratic management. But I think with that power going away and Doge no longer representing the full force of Elon Musk, it began to lose to the cabinet level consensus, which is a lot more business as usual.
It's not good. So we got to restore that. Maybe just need a new burst of talent or energy to get back to it. Because I thought the Doge was a historic opportunity, and not say it's not moving to some degree. It's got to, but I would like more. Mike, I want to get to the big one. So Epstein. So I want to go soup to nuts on this. I want to go with narrative stuff, how we got here, and then I want to go in terms of revelations that we've seen recently and what we can anticipate looking down the road. But overall, I've been talking about this concept of how we should have released the files. The initial release was botched. It was I think a very, in retrospect, maybe the worst moment of the year for MAGA, the way the Epstein files part 1 was released. I think I'm not trying to point fingers. We all know who to point fingers to. That's not the point. I'm just stating it was bad. And then the Democrats realized that they could drive a wedge within the conservative movement by saying Epstein, Epstein, Epstein over and over again. They, of course, never cared about Epstein when Joe Biden was president. And then now all of a sudden it dawned on them this is politically smart. I spoke to one top-level Democrat strategist just this week, and they said once they realized they were losing the shutdown, they pivoted back to Epstein. Like, it's all intentional. But now we got some more files out, more coming out. And we could still win this one in the end, but just evaluate until I want to get this pre the Larry Summers releases, which I really want to focus on, but just evaluate the narrative arc and how we kind of botched this one and how big of a hole did we dig ourselves into.
Well, the expectations were built up to be extraordinarily high. I think pretty much every major Trump appointee, including Trump himself, especially in the early days, built up the Epstein disclosures as being bombshells if they were to ever come out, and pledging to bring them out. And I think that you saw this at the FBI level. I think you saw this at the Justice Department level. I think you saw this at the Trump White House inner circle level. I mean, everybody made it sound like that, Joe Biden's White House and Justice Department was essentially covering up the Epstein scandal to protect high-level Democrats, and that Bill Barr had betrayed the Trump, the sort of Trump base on MAGA with, a potential cover-up around either suicide or murder in his own cell, and that Bill Barr was also rogue in a lot of ways. And so it was built up that there were going to be these big disclosures around Epstein. And then I think it got wrapped up in the other sides of the MAGA civil war, because there is the inevitable entwinement of the national security state on the U.S. side, but also on allied sides like in Israel and Saudi Arabia and the UK and France. But in particular on the Israel side, I think that there was a perception, especially around the time that of the Iran strikes, and the fact that this was a coalition of a domestic-focused voter base And at the institutional level, there is, I've said since the beginning, this has been a marriage of, I don't think that one side of MAGA could win without the other. I think that if you did not have the institutional clout of the foreign policy establishment focused, in large part on the welfare and thriving of Israel, you would not have had the support institutionally at the media level, at the financial level, for the Trump movement. And I don't think that the foreign policy focused side of MAGA could have won either in 2016 or 2024 without the domestic focused side of the MAGA voting base. And so I think that if neither side has the other, they both lose to Democrats.
Well said.
And you end up with, a Merrick Garland who arrests all the domestic focused MAGA people, and a Jake Sullivan and a National Security Council run by a former Iranian intelligence guy. So, but the problem is after they won in 2024, there has been this, and this happens in every Democratic winning coalition, is that once they win and there's no longer the White Walkers, so to speak, winter is coming. There's no longer the different warring tribes need to band together to fight this common enemy. Once that happens, they begin to fight for the spoils of the war that they were in together, and now they've won, and now they need to divvy up the spoils, and there becomes this kind of soft civil war, this kind of internecine tete-a-tete. And I think that is what's playing out right now with Tucker Carlson and Candace and the Heritage Foundation. And I think that the opening for this as a real rift, I think probably traces back to the Epstein story, but even before the Iran strikes, as being kind of the first moment where you had folks who were on the domestic focused side of the great America story saying, who are they protecting? Given these relationships with, the Les Wexner and Ehud Barak and this whole network, are they blocking these files because the Likud party folks were so, down with Trump throughout 3 election cycles, or maybe you'd say 2. I don't know how much you'd say in 2020, but and so I think that opened up this vector where there became this presupposition in a significant part of MAGA that the reason the Epstein files were not being disclosed was not necessarily because of protecting the victims and protecting the privacy of the victims, but rather because there was this much bigger set of forces at play.
Yeah, and that's highly possible. But what's interesting to me, and I would love you to analyze what you think it was. What's the big holdup? But I'm also curious is how the Democrats, it just dawned on them that this is the way forward, is we're going to divide MAGA over Epstein. And they're all on the same page. And then you've got Republicans, regardless of what you think of them in general, but Thomas Massie and Marjorie Taylor Greene, they're absolutely part of the group that's parroting Democrat talking points. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene is on CNN to do this. But I want to get your thoughts on the Democrat angle politically, but I want to get your thoughts on why do you think it was so complicated to get this stuff out?
Yeah, well, this again gets to this issue where Trump has been pretty severe with MTG and Massie, and it's a very complicated relationship they have. I think a lot of people see MTG as being dyed in the wool, was loyal kind of through and through to Trump, unlike Lindsey Graham, for example, who famously said, "I'm out, count me out," after January 6th and the like. MTG stuck with it, was personally dinged, kicked off had her Twitter account, I forget if it was throttled or temporarily banned. And you've seen Trump kind of call to primary MTG, I believe, and Thomas Massie. And what MTG and Massie are calling for, I think, is very popular in terms of just the Epstein files release.
I think polling wise, it absolutely is popular. I think that's
It-
why I kind of asked the first part of my question, which is, what do you think was the holdup? When you look at the polls, it's like everyone wants the files out. And
right.
so we're going to get blamed collectively, MAGA, Trump, and if they don't come out. So then, and
Well, with the Democrats, I think it's completely cynical.
that's right.
So, I think this is honestly just a focus grouped, DNC consultant thing where they see,
Literally.
this, look, they're fighting about Epstein. If we poke here, they'll fight more.
Yeah.
We can wedge and divide. I mean, this is like
to take out the can of lighter fluid, just squeeze it right on it. Yeah.
If I was a sociopathic, paid political consultant, just trying to cynically do what's best for, red team, blue team, I do the same thing. Yeah. It's now what's so funny is they're doing it with the knowledge that there are all these own goals, self-reports, even as they're doing this. Like as they released these 20,000 emails where Trump is mentioned 1,500 times and they're, to put pressure on Trump over Epstein, it comes out that Stacey Plaskett, for the House of Representatives member from the U.S. Virgin Islands, was literally texting with Jeffrey Epstein during one of the hearings and taking like $35,000 in campaign contributions from Epstein. You had Barack Obama's personal lawyer, Kathy Rumler, plotting in these emails with Jeffrey Epstein about how to get Trump impeached and indicted over the New York case. And it's like the emails showed how deep in bed the highest levels of the DNC congressional and executive branch were with Epstein. But what's more important to them is that these emails also have references to Trump. And the more Trump's name is mentioned in the Epstein files, the more it looks like Elon Musk was right. If folks remember, there was that was one of the, when Trump and Elon had their falling out, one of the things that Elon tweeted was that Trump's name is in the Epstein files. And this was something that was coming from a huge part of that wedge axis. This, MTG, Massey, people like myself even were, talking about pretty openly that the refusal to release Epstein files is obviously because Epstein is a bipartisan story. And yet, you have to be willfully blind to not see the Republican Party connections with Epstein. As we, talked about, you have the Apollo the Apollo, hedge fund world, the Leon Black type, financial support. There have been these meetings that have come out with Epstein and Peter Thiel. There have been, Trump bought Adnan Khashoggi's yacht in 1989. That was, Adnan Khashoggi was Jeffrey Epstein's client. You had the fact that Trump is on the Epstein flight logs from 1993 and 1994. They clearly ran in similar circles. While Jeffrey Epstein had power of attorney over Victoria's Secret, Donald Trump owned Miss America and Miss USA and Miss Universe, the beauty pageants with all these partnerships with Victoria's Secret. It's clear that this goes back a long time.
Right.
And so there's a perception that Trump is protecting his friends by not giving disclosure on Epstein.
Okay, but give me your answer. What is your view? Why do you think it was held up? It's obviously very complicated, and I'm sure Trump's made the calculation, or had, and he's revised it, that it would do more harm than good to put stuff out. But we don't know for sure. We haven't seen everything to this point, but do you have an official explanation of why he was feeling that way?
Well, his own words came back to context. If folks remember, he was asked, I think while he was in the Oval Office, he gave a response at a media scrum saying, it's about context. These names will be released and innocent people will simply end up being named in these files We don't know whether the allegations are even true or not. For example, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA could be collecting human intelligence, signals intelligence, email traffic that picks up a rumor about. I mean, we saw this, for example, in the JFK files. This happened all the time. The CIA analyst memos would be reporting on, the CIA was literally opening up the mail of Lee Harvey Oswald and trading their own theories about what was happening and dragging other people's names into the muck. And that's not a defamation suit. You can't. The people who are impacted by those rumors of the CIA or FBI or DOJ spitballing theories will suffer reputational damage. And what kind of recompense can they get for that? They can't sue the CIA for trading different theories about how they may have been involved. That was not published. That was yanked out of them by subpoenaed documents or congressionally ordered disclosures. And so I think from what Trump was saying is these names are going to be released, and we don't know if the information is even true or not. And it will have reputational damage because no one will report on the context of it. They will just, report that they were associated with Epstein, and everything that's associated with Epstein is radioactive. And so I think that was Trump's position then. I think that's his position now. But the problem is this has gotten so hot, and it has been with us for so long now. I mean, and at this point, in my view, it's the job of honest media to simply provide that context. And frankly, the more people, the more names that come out, the bigger the record is on it, the more it may actually absolve a lot of the people who are simply noted as in association with Epstein, because everybody was, from the president himself to the former president Bill Clinton to the top lawyer of Barack Obama. I mean, if something is going to impact domestic politics so much, I think the domestic voters have a right to know what the national security state or foreign policy establishment side of the equation is. Otherwise, we don't know what we're voting on when the Epstein issue is part of what people are voting on in an election. When you're campaigning on disclosures about this issue, and so this is kind of my problem with national security classifications in general, which is that everything that's classified is something that the American people can't know about before they vote. So everything that's classified about Syria completely blinds the American people from choosing between two different candidates in their foreign policy on Syria. Everything that's classified about Ukraine blinds the voters about when they have to decide whether to go for a Trump or a Clinton type on Ukraine. So too it is on Epstein.
So Mike, here's what I really want to get into Larry Summers, because I think this is a huge thread that I want to pull for you. But I just want to do I want everyone to take out their number 2 pencil right now, and I want your concise summary that Trump said he's got nothing to hide. He's going to sign it. So it's only a matter of time. We're going to get all the details. The Democrats are, hotly anticipating this. They think they're going to get the last laugh. I feel like this very well could backfire, because the more we learn, the more that we're finding out that it's the Democrats that have deep ties, and they're doing what they can to protect themselves. You saw Jamie Raskin going to the mat to protect Stacey Plaskett, who was getting coached through her hearings by Epstein. So I want you to give me where do you think this is going to go? Where do you think this is going to go in a nutshell from here?
Well, I mean, the resolution at the House passed 427-1. So, I mean, if the numbers are anything like that in the Senate, I don't think Trump is going to have a choice. I mean, it's going to be a veto-proof majority. Although
he's going to sign
one of the right. I mean, I think he'll have to, and I think if it's veto-proof majority, it would just look bad. It would just be symbolic if he tried to stop it at this point. And I think that members of Congress are under pressure to have Epstein disclosure. Otherwise, their primary opponents or their opponents in their next congressional race are going to say they covered up for Epstein because they voted against the disclosure bill. Now, what you saw Mike Johnson come out and say yesterday was that they needed to make sure that there were national security redactions, that they need to make sure that whatever bill was passed had to redact the documents so that there was nothing that undermined U.S. national security in disclosures about Jeffrey Epstein, which is something that I like and have a lot of respect for Speaker Johnson. I think that while a true statement is a strange thing to emphasize at a time like this, because it kind of, in my view, gives the game away about what they're concerned with protecting, which is this relationship between Jeffrey Epstein and our own CIA or foreign intelligence agencies. And what we want is transparency about that. We want the opposite of redactions
So
around
let's say that does come out, that he had a relationship with our CIA or other foreign intelligence agencies. How do we play that?
Well, I think that whoever, when those disclosures come out, inevitably, that I think the way we play this by celebrating the transparency of it. I think that, frankly, that is something everyone kind of just knows at this point.
Yeah.
Why was Jeffrey Epstein meeting 3 times with Bill Burns, the CIA director, while he was the undersecretary for political affairs at the State Department, when 50% of the political affairs branch is CIA under diplomatic cover? I mean, you're meeting directly with the CIA director, equivalent in foreign countries. I mean, and again, dating back to the 1980s with the Iran-Contra Adnan Khashoggi stuff. I mean, it's so obvious. It's been going on for so long. I think we honestly react to that by celebrating transparency and saying, thank goodness someone pulled the Band-Aid off. There you go. I mean, look, markets, what do they say? That that uncertainty looms larger than losses. When you don't, in market modeling theory, a company that people think there may be a bad thing that the company has to report, and there's a liability that's uncertain, that hits that company's stock price much worse than simply admitting what the bad thing was, writing down or whatever the asset's worth is, and then the loss is priced in. It's not constantly under the uncertainty because you don't know whether to invest in the thing because there's this bombshell that might drop. Once it's dropped, you can start clean. And I think that I think people saw Trump's reactions, snapping at reporters and saying, "Oh, Epstein, you're still talking about the Epstein stuff after nothing had been disclosed," and look, the MAGA base has been trained to be very, very persistent by Trump himself. So we're used to the media doing this to us in terms of trying to hand wave away scandals and us having to be rabid attack dogs until, we get to the bottom of something. And I think just pull the Band-Aid off at this point.
Good. So we're doing it. So what do we know so far? And I want to go through a few examples. Let's talk about just a couple quick ones, because I really want to explore Larry Summers, because that's my favorite. But in particular, talk to me about Stacey Plaskett.
Well, what happened with Stacey Plaskett is so this is the representative for the U.S. Virgin Islands. Jeffrey Epstein had his billion-dollar hedge fund headquartered in the U.S. Virgin Islands, which has a very lax set of banking disclosure and compliance laws, which allows it to be the front end of the offshore banking system from the U.S. side. Oftentimes, if you want to covertly move money around or enter the offshore banking system as an American, the U.S. Virgin Islands are a very good jumping off point for that because of the peculiar local laws around what needs to be disclosed. And so Epstein lived in the U.S. Virgin Islands. He ran his fund out of the U.S. Virgin Islands. And Stacey Plaskett is the representative for the U.S. Virgin Islands. Jeffrey Epstein gave tens of thousands of dollars to Stacey Plaskett's political campaign, helped her win her underdog race. And
where did these donations take place relative to the allegations against him?
Oh, they were after
the right?
2008 indictment. And same with the Larry Summers side. These were after he had already been a convicted, child sex trafficker, effectively. And but obviously, what mattered to Stacey Plaskett was the money, not the medal of the person giving it. And so Stacey Plaskett, had this come from behind political victory thanks to Epstein bucks. And that's just Epstein himself. I mean, knowing the donor network affiliated with Epstein, I wouldn't be surprised if many of the other contributions to Stacey Plaskett's campaign came because Jeffrey Epstein asked other donors to make matching donations. And so it's clear that Stacey Plaskett had this close, favorable, beholden, you might say, relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. And so, it's now been reported that she was texting with Jeffrey Epstein for advice about her own questioning of, around the Trump, financial scandals of, I believe it was 2018.
All right. So, and then we've got a fun one, which we don't need to dwell too much on, but Jazz Crockett was saying that all these donations from Epstein going to Republicans were the wrong Epstein. So that's another one where Democrats are off to a very slow and weak start here. Totally different person. And then she was acting as though these are Republicans who were doing it. Jamie Raskin out on a limb defending Plaskett. So let's talk about Larry Summers here, because this to me is just total bombshell, because this is someone, Mike, our people who've heard our previous interviews together, in particular the last one where we went in depth on Harvard, and Harvard's not what it seems. Everyone, I can't recommend that episode enough. I think one of the most popular in the history of the show, so everyone should go pull that down if you can. But when we go through some of the, I would say, secret history of Harvard and where the money comes from and where it's going, Larry Summers, president of Harvard, a fixture of the Obama worldview in America, just the establishment, just sort of liberal white elitism that has dominated a lot of America's culture, and he's completely wrapped up in this. But I want you to walk us through what we learned about Summers.
Right, Larry Epstein. I'm sorry, Larry Epstein. Larry Summers was also
could be Larry Epstein. It could be Jimmy King.
Right. Well, he was also the Secretary of the Treasury.
Yeah.
I mean, he was the head of all money in America.
And he lead Obama's Economic Council too. So he's like you couldn't give the guy more titles when it comes to money.
Right. Exactly. And look, when the United States of America had its first meeting of Congress in 1789, we only created 3 departments: the Department of State, the Department of War, and the Department of Treasury.
Wow.
And, Larry Summers was the head of the Treasury. And what you see here is just this incredible relationship in terms of the extent and depth of it between himself and Jeffrey Epstein. Now, everyone knew that Epstein had been involved with Harvard University. If you go to Google Image and you type in Jeffrey Epstein, very quickly you'll find Epstein in Harvard University shirts and apparel. I believe Eric Weinstein also, has spoken at length about Epstein hanging around Harvard and organizing different conferences to poach and meddle, kind of hobnob with the Harvard intellectual class. But as I see it, the real story around Epstein and Harvard has to do with Harvard's role in shadow diplomacy and deal making on the international stage, acting as a supersized NGO. Just as NGOs are essentially influence organizations that influence markets or governments at the behest of their nonprofit donors. You see the same thing playing out at the universities. Universities are 501c3s. They are nonprofits. They are kind of just big foundations. They're just big NGOs. And Harvard, as we talked about, was set to receive $9 billion in government grants, free money from the federal government coming into Trump's term. They have a $56 billion hedge fund where the Harvard College is attached to it, and that's the Harvard Endowment. And given Larry Summers' role as president, as formerly effectively running the privatization of Russia at the end of the Cold War through the Harvard Institute for International Development, this relationship with running Harvard's money being attached to the U.S. national security, state, and foreign policy establishment to mold markets in foreign countries, and then to have Harvard's $56 billion endowment be able to invest in the custom deals effectively only available to a small handful of investors because those deals are made possible by brokering with the State Department or other U.S. allied governments to make. Like this was what happened in the 90s with Harvard, the Harvard Endowment investing in all these different Russian steel companies, oil companies, debt instruments, and having Halliburton-style no-bid auctions to buy up Russian assets while the U.S. State Department was putting its elbow on Russian regulators to sell off these assets to the Harvard Endowment. What we just saw break in a pretty incredible story from Dropsite News is the story in Mongolia, how Jeffrey Epstein helped to broker. Now, Dropsite News is billing it how Jeffrey Epstein helped to broker an Israeli security agreement with Mongolia. And they only mentioned the Larry Summers aspect of this in passing. But this I think, gets back to this kind of myopia around a lot of Epstein researchers about the Israel connection, which is a real connection. But they kind of miss the forest for the trees here. What's described in this article, and this comes out of 100,000 emails that were hacked or leaked from Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak was the former Israeli Labor Party prime minister, so kind of the opposition to Benjamin Netanyahu. But he was also formerly the head of Amman, Israeli military intelligence, and he was the former defense minister, the former head of the Israeli military. And what you see here is that Mongolia, this relates to activities between 2012 and 2014. Mongolia in about 2005 discovered the world's largest copper mine and a whole slew of metals associated with in its mining industry. And this led to a deluge from the U.S. State Department and USAID to try to capture this market and make sure that Chinese mining firms and Russian mining firms didn't get to control this huge new burst of wealth responsible for half of Mongolia's GDP. And so we quickly moved in to pressure the government of Mongolia to license effectively a significant part of the mining and metals wealth to a British firm called Rio Tinto. Now, Rio Tinto is one of the world's largest metals and mining firms. It's a British firm, and it is, because it's British, it's part of our transatlantic U.S.-UK special relationship. And it is not uncommon for the State Department and USAID to pressure foreign governments to buy from British companies as opposed to buying from Chinese or Russian ones. I was a part of this in the State Department under Trump 1.0 when I was at the cyber desk for the U.S. State Department. One of our pushes was to try to get foreign countries to buy LG or Nokia phone 5G software and hardware tech rather than Huawei. And
Sure.
even though, Nokia and 5G. These are Finnish and South Korean companies. They're not American, but the idea was we want to limit AT&T and Sprint don't have 5G at this point in 2019, 2020. And so we're helping a foreign government's national champions because they're an allied foreign government rather than a hostile one. But the fact is Rio Tinto was a major investment of George Soros. And so it was, and so when you look at it from that angle, it looks like the State Department. So anyway, let me just back this up to say that what's actually shown in the documents, and I'll read the direct quote, and I actually called this. I was doing a private live stream for my ex-subscribers when I saw this article about Mongolia and Jeffrey Epstein and Larry Summers going to Mongolia to try to get the government of Mongolia to agree to buy essentially Israeli military technology. I said, Mongolia, I bet you this is a bigger story than this. I bet you they're going to go to the mining and metals, and I bet you they're going to probably try to lobby the government of Mongolia to do favors for George Soros and invest more deep and give better deal terms to Rio Tinto. That's literally what I said live. The clip of this is on my X account. And so I scroll through this, and of course, what do I find is here's the direct quote. According to draft minutes from the meeting attached an email from Ehud Barak, Summers proposed that Mongolia create a sovereign wealth fund to invest aggressively in equities using proceeds from commodity exports and advised improving relations with the multinational mining company Rio Tinto. Epstein then recommended an evaluation of all of the country's financial structures and institutions in addition to the sovereign wealth fund. So you have Larry Summers with all of the clout and all of the favors promises that he can subtly imply that he can confer upon the government of Mongolia if they do this, that if they create the sovereign wealth fund, they'll be in the good favor of the Harvard endowment, maybe the $56 billion worth of Harvard endowment capital is going to elevate the GDP and make richer the people of Mongolia. All of this is kind of subliminally intoned when a representative like Larry Summers goes to a foreign country and asks them to do something. And then he tells them to set up this sovereign wealth fund and invest aggressively in equities like Rio Tinto. So while Rio Tinto is held in a massive long position by George Soros, so having a foreign government set up a sovereign wealth fund to invest in George Soros's portfolio companies, to me is a massive story. And to my mind, how do I know about the Jeffrey Epstein? How do I know about the George Soros Rio Tinto stuff, for example? The only reason I know about that is because of Julian Assange. Julian Assange, in about 6 or 7 years ago, published State Department cables, leaked State Department cables from the early 1970s to about 2015. And I mined those State Department cables for every reference to George Soros, the Open Society Foundation, and I found a huge stack of State Department cables talking about George Soros in Mongolia. But there's an opportunity right now to tie this Epstein stuff to mass disclosures around the entire foundation network that I think is the path forward for getting wins for this administration and ensuring that the weaponization of the prior administration can't happen again, which is fundamentally renegotiating the United States government relationship with the NGO class and these massive liberal foundations, which have been with us since the 1930s, 1940s, the Ford Foundation types, which now begot the Open Society Foundation, Omidyar, the Newmark, the Knight Foundation. And all of these foundations have been working with the U.S. government in conjunction on joint foreign policy goals, which are foreign policy goals of the U.S. government, but they're also market-making goals of the hedge funds attached to these foundations. And my position on this, and what I'm trying to communicate to the Trump administration, is if you are going to use that secrecy as a sword abroad to pry open markets, to secretly advance U.S. foreign policy using covert action coordinated through these foundations, and you are going to operate domestically at the same time, you can't use secrecy as a shield at home if you're using it as a sword abroad. And so I believe, for example, every single classified document that mentions the Open Society Foundation should be made public
Love that.
by the Trump administration. The Open Society Foundation wants to play around at home and meddle in domestic politics. At that point, it has to give up its secrecy shield about how it's meddled with the U.S. government in foreign affairs.
I'm going to go back. I love that point, Mike, but I do want to go back to Summers, and I want to go back to his ties to Epstein specifically. We all know Epstein tried to get in good with the Harvard crowd, and Summers was, of course, a huge part of the Obama network, but also part of the broader NGO culture. And so let's make the connection literal for people. What was their exact relationship that we know of now? And it must be pretty bad because Summers has already announced he's taking a big retreat from public life.
Right. Well, the thing that Summers is retreating from public life for, to me, is not even the real scandal here, but it's unseemly and hugely embarrassing on the girl front. Basically, Larry Summers was messaging Jeffrey Epstein for, if I'm getting this right, for advice on how to seduce a woman associated with the CCP, effectively. I mean, it was like he was asking for girl advice, basically, pick up, kind of like, how do I seduce this, this woman? And,
oh my gosh.
She's like some scion of a major CCP guy. And it's, that's the thing that he's getting canceled for, which is that post-conviction in 2008, you're asking a convicted child sex trafficker for advice on how to pick up women. I mean, that's just a bad look.
I know the international conspiracies are, I guess, theoretically worse, but that's pretty horrible.
Yeah, well, but it's not illegal. Okay, look, how do I say this? I completely agree with you. That is a career-ending thing to do. But what I'm stressing here is nailing Summers on that does not change the system.
Sure.
Our epidemic, in my view, is not like the reason we got prosecuted, that Trump was thrown in jail, Trump was hit with 91 felony charges and had $800 million stolen from him in legal fees. And the reason that we lost our First Amendment for 4 years and the entire country was turned upside down was not because of like an epidemic of child sex trafficking. It was because of this relationship between the national security state, the nonprofit foundations, and their instruments of power in the government itself.
Okay, well stated, and I'm glad I got that. I'm glad I got that quote from you. But please, continue with what's worse? What is the thing that he did that you feel like is truly the scandal here? And I think this is where, as the disclosures continue to come out, a place where we need to have some serious focus.
Okay, so as I see it, there's this incredible opportunity. Trump was really, earlier this year in 2025, I think for the first time in American history, a U.S. president moved to renegotiate the relationship between the federal government and the big universities. This is a relationship that had been really set up under the Eisenhower administration in the 1950s, when at the dawn of the Cold War, President Eisenhower began to massively capacity build U.S. colleges and universities as these kind of super NGOs that could be given money by the federal government to produce intelligence and to develop influence with members of foreign governments, members of foreign elites and intellectuals, to help create markets for U.S. corporations who in turn would co-invest with the endowments. And right now, like Larry Summers represents Harvard University. I mean, he was the president of Harvard, a teacher at Harvard, ran the operations at Harvard in the post-Cold War era. And Larry Summers is here just in this example, for example, on Mongolia. This is in Epstein began recruiting associates to participate in Mongolia's advisory council in September 2013. Says while Obama was president, Epstein emailed Ehud Barak to float the idea of working alongside Larry Summers, a Harvard economist who served in the Clinton-Obama administrations. Epstein writes, spent the afternoon with Larry Summers. I think he would work well with you. He's talking to Ehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister and head of Israeli military intelligence. Ehud Barak responds affirmatively. I think greatly of him, especially in regarding advice for sovereign heads. We can complement each other effectively with a lot of synergies. Then they proceed with this Mongolia Presidential Advisory Agreement, and then which held its inaugural meeting in Davos, attended by the Mongolian president and national security advisor and Larry Summers. So they connect Larry Summers to the president of Mongolia. Then Summers proposes that Mongolia creates the Sovereign Wealth Fund and invest in Rio Tinto, the British mining firm. And what I'm getting at here is, and I'm curious to actually cross-check what Larry Summers' position in 2013 was at Harvard University, because I want to make sure I'm getting the timeline right. In terms of when he was president versus when he was just a professor versus when he was actually. So Larry Summers was the Treasury Secretary under Bill Clinton from 1999 to 2001. He was the president of Harvard University from 2001 to 2006. And oh my gosh, and he's also director at the Harvard Kennedy School. Good gracious. Chief economist for the World Bank. But in 2013, I just want to make sure, was he effectively freelance at that time? Okay, so it looks like he was the director, you were right, of the Obama National Economic Council until 2011. So it looks like he had just kind of become a free agent in 2013 in terms of he was still, I think, a Harvard professor, but not formally, the president of the university, but he was very recently the president of it. But what I would like to be done here is I would like transparency around Harvard's endowment. And this is something that I think is a major, major surface area of attack for the Trump admin to renegotiate the balance of power with the universities. Was the Harvard endowment investing in Rio Tinto while Larry Summers was telling the government of Mongolia to pour millions of dollars into Harvard's investments? That's like one question here. And part of the problem that we can't get transparency around this anymore is because after the 1990s, and Harvard got in all this trouble with its endowment being caught making money from looting Russia while it was tasked by USAID to do the economic reforms, Harvard's investments are now opaque. I can't see what Harvard is investing in anymore. At the portfolio company level, like you could in the 1990s. So we're giving $9 billion in grants to Harvard University, while Harvard University has a $56 billion endowment. Harvard could be teaching its kids total BS about climate change because the Harvard endowment is invested in a bunch of biodiesel, ethanol, fuel replacements. The Harvard University Press could be putting out junk science because it helps the Harvard endowment's investments in the public health or pharmaceutical or climate or foreign policy spaces. The whole science could be perverted because of what Harvard is investing in. And since we know that Larry Summers was personally involved in this economic profiteering for Harvard University's endowment in the 1990s, when we see Larry Summers doing this profiteering for a Soros portfolio company with Jeffrey Epstein as part of his entourage to do the negotiating, I want to know if Harvard University's endowments were profiting from that as well. And if so, all this should be made public. I think every university that receives government funds as part of this Compact for Higher Education has to make its private investment fund public and trackable, just the same way that politicians. We know we got a Nancy Pelosi stock tracker so that she's making tens of millions of dollars from her investments, and it's not illegal. For whatever reason, it's not illegal, but there is a scandal associated with it. We can at least have some public accountability because we know what she's investing in, because she's required by law to make those investments transparent. I think if you take $1 from the federal government as a university research center, we have a right to know what the endowment is investing in, so we know the credibility of that research. Are you publishing that research because it's true, or are you publishing it because you're profiting from the results of this research being accepted by the scientific or international community?
Wonderful. And that's where we'll start next time. Mike Benz, amazing. Always great to have you on. And time always flies when you're here. And thanks for all the great work you're doing online. And just remind everyone where we can find all your stuff.
You can find me on X, on YouTube, on Rumble, on Instagram, all at the same handle, at Mike Benz Cyber. And my foundation's work is at Foundation for Freedom Online.
Foundation for Freedom Online. Anything you can do to help Mike out, helps me out, helps the country out. So I can't give you a bigger endorsement than that. Mike, thank you, my friend.
Likewise.